is Julie Pearson, Little Thunder. Today is Wednesday, October 18th, 2017, and I'm interviewing Jerry Butterbaugh for the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at Oklahoma State University. Jerry, you graduated from OSU in 1969, majored in psychology and philosophy.
Yes, ma'am.
Which you turned around and applied to a varied business career. You worked as vice president of real estate and construction for a convenience store chain. You did franchising and business development. You worked in the pipeline industry. Our interview today is going to focus on your undergraduate experiences and your involvement with the Friday afternoon tea and Glee Club. And we'll talk a little bit about your subsequent experiences. Thank you for coming in today.
It's a pleasure being here.
Where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, 1946. My dad graduated from Spartan School of Aeronautics and had hopes of starting a small airport in Pawhuska. And that did not pan out. By 1948, he was in Shidler in Fairfax, Oklahoma, working in oil fields. So I grew up in Osage County, western Osage County, in very much oil territory. And went to grade school, junior high and high school at Fairfax High School, which is now combined with Ralston, is known as Woodland High School.
What did your mom do for a living?
Mom met Dad during the war years, and long way to answer your question, she had been a Nebraska farm girl, had gone to business school in Missouri, was working for Swift & Company in Chicago and met this soldier. They got married in '43, and she continued to work for Swift & Company in transportation during World War II. And then after marrying Dad and me being born in 1946, I'm the oldest of 5 children. She ended up being mostly a home engineer and seeing that all her kids got educated.
And that's a big job. Yeah, I was going to ask where you were in the lineup of children.
Yes, ma'am. I'm the oldest.
Okay.
Good or bad, I'm the oldest on that one. Yes, ma'am.
Did you have any experiences in elementary or junior high that kind of indicated where your interests would lie in the future? Once you got into higher education, did you know that you wanted to pursue higher education?
The short answer is I thought I did. Growing up where I did, it was rather traditional. You did ranch work, farm work, raised 4-H animals, hogs, so forth. And if you wanted a cash job, you worked in the oil field. So I ended up working in the oil field 3 of the years that I was in high school, and on 1 year going on wheat harvest to the north. And I thought I wanted to be a petroleum engineer or mechanical engineer. And obviously that's what I could see around me, and that was one of the top ranking positions in the oil industry. I got burned in the summer of 1965, July 30th, in an oil field explosion. And I lost my face and my arms and spent 5 weeks in the hospital. 6 days after I got out of the hospital, I was down here on a Sunday entering OSU. I was very much an albino, incredibly white. My ears were peeling, my nose, my lips were peeling. I was fortunate that I had had very little lung damage and no significant eye damage piece. That became a very momentous moment because for an 18-year-old male in 1965, you had the draft hanging over your shoulder. And although I was bright and I had scholarships, going to ROTC and showing up and saying to the instructor, I can't wear the uniform, he said, we don't want you anyway, just looking at me. There were other lessons from that moment. One of those lessons was walking around this campus where everybody stares at you physically. And that humanized me to the sense that when I see people that are, quote, different, having once been there, I have an appreciation for that. And the campus was a welcoming, warm place. And I spent 65 and 66 in the College of Engineering. And at that moment, OSU's engineering department was undergoing a major curriculum change. And it was working on the OSU Engineering, the College Department Engineering magazine, even attended national convention on that engineering magazine, and we had good professors. But the problem that the entire engineering industry had and engineering education had was that people were too narrowly focused. They were technically focused, and the curriculum was being changed to say to the engineers, go take humanities courses. Become broader based. We need for you guys to be broad based. We would like to see you have a management channel as well as a technical engineering channel. That was a major event because once I was in humanities courses and starting to see an entirely different world, my opinions broadened immensely. It also exposed me to a different group of people. That led to 1966, 67, where I am questioning life. I'm questioning the Vietnam War involvement intensely. I ultimately make a change from engineering to the College of Arts and Sciences, and I am a little bit behind in catching up in requirements. So,
now, you're a junior at that point?
no, I'm a sophomore.
You're a sophomore.
I'm a sophomore going through the typical examinations of life. And it was a tumultuous time, both in the national community with the Vietnam War, civil rights movement, free thought movement, women's rights, any way you looked at it. It was slowly coming to the OSU campus as well. We had been, as you would expect, a little bit behind the coast and catching up.
Right. So what were some of the campus activities that you were involved with?
The campus
Or organizations?
organization, the quick answer was that as an engineering student, I was involved in the College of Engineering, and I was working with the engineering magazine that freshman year and part of my sophomore year. I also, because of a class I took, either analytical geometry or pre-calc, we had 47 students in the class, 6 of us had American diplomas, and most of it were international students, and we studied together. It led to a lot of friends, and it was a good involvement for me because, once again, it opened my eyes to an entirely different world. Some of those friends lasted all through my college years, and in my senior year, I was the honorary president of the Indian Students Association. I was also involved in IRC, which was the International Relations Committee, and they hosted a social tea once a week and over in the student union. So you met people of diverse backgrounds in an informal setting, and it was a marvelous time. I had friends on the more controversial side in Students for Democratic Society. The best man at my wedding turned out to be Dean Perry, and Dean had been president of the Students for Democratic Society, and most Oklahomans considered that an incredibly radical organization at that moment.
And can you explain what their mission was? Or focus?
I don't know in retrospect I can explain it fully, but there was and is a great liberal movement in this country. And it was philosophically an anti-war movement. And if you go to its educational underpinnings, its philosophical underpinnings, you come up with a number of great philosophers, religious teachers, ethical teachers, people that spoke on this campus, people like Henry Steele Commager, the historian. I was pleased to have a couple hours to visit with him when he spoke here. Other people that spoke was Joseph Fletcher. And Joseph Fletcher is known as the father of situational ethics. And he was a man that in the 40s, 50s, 60s was for euthanasia, abortion rights. His principles, he had 6 founding principles, and they were primarily focused on love, and that being the major issue decision. And it was not sexual love, it was the love in the form of Christian kind of love. That should be what guides your decision making. In philosophy courses, we were also studying Bonhoeffer, we were studying Heidegger, people that affected World War II immensely in ethical positions. And so it was all coming together as a conversation. This country, this state, and this campus was facing major change. Oklahoma A&M had an incredibly dark moment in 1951 in what is known as the Johnny Bright incident. which is briefly put, is a situation where there were strong anti-black feelings expressed, and this black football player from Drake University played here in OSU, and we went after him and physically harmed him. So you then had the civil rights movement coming on. Oklahoma was slow to integrate, slow to participate. By the time I was here as a campus, I had many friends, including Melvin Wade, who was, I think, president of the African American Students Association. That was perhaps 350 people. And it was also a moment of political change among the campus leadership. And when I say that, you had a Reverend President retire, and in 1967, I think it is, 66, Dr. Comm became president. And to tie some pieces together, prior to Dr. Comm being president, he had come to the OSU campus in '58. Before that period, he had been at Drake, which ties back to the Johnny Bright incident. So he was aware of Oklahoma State. He had been prominent on the national scene. He comes in here and Vice President for Student Affairs, and then I think also leading College of Arts and Sciences. And following him was Dean Robert Scales, who was a marvelous dean who had come out of Oklahoma Baptist and up here, and afterwards would go on to the Southeast to be a noted university president himself. I have special feelings and fondness because when I made the change from engineering to arts and sciences, I needed to catch up. So I go to Dean Scales and say, I want to take 22 hours this second semester as a sophomore. He looks at it, he says, "You in class?" And I said, "Yeah." I ended up having 40 hours of class between all the labs and so forth. I was here. And it was immersion at its best, and it was good for me. And that was kind of the same moment that I was meeting my wife too. So it was an intense, good moment on this campus.
Well, tell us the story of how you met your wife.
Well, it's now a little bit over 50 years, but in that same analytical calc class, there were 6 Americans, and one of those, besides me, was a redheaded Italian from Newark, New Jersey, named John Tanzola. And John was dating a girl named Inez Hokla from Oklahoma City. Her roommate was a woman named Emma D. Mode, whose father had graduated from Oklahoma State in the late 40s. One morning after class, John meets Inez on the corner of the library, steps out here, and her roommate is with her. And that is the first time that I met who is now my wife, and we have in August celebrated our 48th wedding anniversary. So it all started here at the library.
That's wonderful. So tell me, on the one hand, the OSU campus had hosted these really fine minds, philosophers, etc., but there were problems that arose because of the OSU campus speakers policy. And I don't know how peripheral those were to your studies or whether you were involved.
If you don't mind, I want to set a little historical context.
Sure.
The period we're talking about here at OSU is basically 66, 67, 68. On a national level, the civil rights movement was taking off in the 50s, and you had Brown versus the Board of Education. At the same time, coincidentally and even earlier, you had the free thought, free speech issues arising. It was driven by many different factors. It was driven through the magazine industry wanting to display more features. It was driven by people wanting to speak. The McCarthy era had just ended, and that effort to control speech and the Hollywood blacklist. So those things were coming to a conclusion and opening new doors. Part of that was the escalation of the Vietnam War. And it was a condensed period of time. Even though we defined the Vietnam War as a 20-year period from the 50s to the mid-70s, what really happened was that the U.S. involvement had not been significant. Some 8,000 or 9,000 perhaps in the 63-64 period. It soon, under Johnson, after Kennedy's assassination in '63, got escalated dramatically. That brought up the discussion that was coming in from the West Coast, from Berkeley in particular, and East Coast universities, of what constitutes a just war. And as a philosophy student, this was a question that showed up as a practical question in ethics courses, in philosophy of religion courses, in everyday conversations. One of the great things about Oklahoma State University was that there was a good, strong dialogue between university professors, teaching assistants, and the students themselves. The sociology department is pretty well documented through the Freytag situation. We philosophers had the Wittgenstein Club that met every Thursday night with conversations, and you had the department head Mayberry there, and you had Radford there, and you had a number of students like Perry, myself, Costed, that were dropping in. So you had this informal discussion focused around one of the principal philosophers of the 20th century, Ludwig Wittgenstein. At the same time, you would have the informal discussions going on about campus events and about world events. So you got to see your professors as humans, and that was a big, important piece. That broadened my education, and that was one of the things that also changed me. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for that information, and especially the free thought, free speech, putting that into context. You mentioned that you also, and of course the Oklahoma legislature played a role in this, the speaker's policy when it was challenged, the OSU speaker's policy. But you also visited the legislature for another reason, and
yes,
and feel free to comment on both.
If campus life, as it is today and was then as well, is incredibly diverse. And you had cowboys that came from ranch country, you had farmers, you had people from the big high schools in Oklahoma City and Tulsa, and you had all kinds of different majors. If there was a different flavor then than today, there was this huge emphasis on ag studies and on engineering studies. And curiously, the Hotel and Restaurant Administration of Oklahoma State was nationally known even then, and its veterinary college. So you had these communities. You also had, in the engineering building, what was called the architectural pit. So you have this basement pit, and because of the time, you have to imagine this place as being any place from 20 to 120 students, nearly all males, and with desks and drafting tables because we didn't have CAD/CAM or computers, and you would have people sleeping on the floor on mattresses coming any time of the day. You would have a few getting sick on Saturday nights, and there were only 2 or 3 women participating in that entire architectural and engineering department back then. So once again, you have a dialogue going. And in that architectural pit, you found an incredible number of GDIs, which is, lack of a better description, goddamn independents that lived off campus and thought that way. And so once again, you would have all the topics of human life going on. You have these events happening with the professors, and as you became aware of the events, the middle of the road people would be maybe the student center, student senate and its participants, and you had the fraternity sorority row, which if you were a GDI you kind of looked at as privileged, and the establishment. And candidly, that group woke up late. You had these major national events happening. You had all us males wandering around campus saying, got to keep my grades up because I don't want to get drafted, hoping the war would decline or go down before we had to go fight it. And you had some people deeply involved with discussions about, do I go to Canada, kind of questions. At the same time, these changes were affecting the state legislature. The publicity was escalating. You had groups all over the state. The Unitarian Universalists in Tulsa, with kind of a peace mission, were starting to say the war is not right. You had student associations. You had the Methodist Center here. You also had a presence of the Ministerial Alliance on campus starting to stake out philosophical positions and recognize it. Not so much because it was becoming popular with the students, but because ethically and philosophically they thought it was the right thing to do. In that process, the lack of funding for university professors and the fact that we were behind became a major issue. And we began to organize the Student Lobby for Higher Education. And we refer to it as SLHE. You'll see it in the OOHRP sometimes as the Student Lobby for Education or the Student Lobby for Higher Education. Jim Gilchrist was one of the people that participated along with a person from OSU, OU, whose name slips my mind. My role in it was a commitment to OSU and a belief that something needed to be done. And specifically, we organized the students to show up at the State House and lobby on behalf of both OU and OSU, saying we need to be financed. And without commenting too much upon political moments, that was 50 years ago. It was 1967, 68, so forth. My role was to be a participant speaker. And what I mean by that is we needed to recruit people. And so we would go to the major lab lectures, and some at the auditorium, some in the College of Engineering, some in the business courses where you could reach 200 students, 300 students at one time and say, here's what this is about if you feel interested. And it was nice to go to the graduate assistants and to the professors and say, can I have 10 minutes of your course hour? And they were supportive of this. The rules were pretty simple. Keep it non-biased, explain the events, present it as a choice to the students. So once again, the campus rose to the occasion. We did have several hundred, if not thousands, show up down that campus. It drew attention to it, and it was a positive way to address a very basic need of the entire structure here in Oklahoma.
And it brought was there a legislative change?
Yes, the budgets did increase there. And I left Oklahoma in 1969. Well, some of these events were still going on. And so I'm not tuned with all of them, but my impression is that funding for education grew in the 70s and 80s, and then budget changes and legislative budget changes with the laws made it more difficult to raise funding and raise taxes. So without getting into today's politics very far, I think there was a magic moment. From a political standpoint, we were as democratic then as we are as a state Republican today. But taking the labels away, the fundamental conservatism was somewhat the same. There was a positive attitude on most parents, most voters. These people whose grandparents came out of the Depression, whose parents, like mine, were in World War II, education represented lifting yourself by the bootstraps. And so to vote on education and funding for education represented a commitment to your own children and family. And I think that moment is probably different now than it was then.
Mm-hmm. So did you and Emmett get married while you were still in school or after?
I applied for the Peace Corps in 1967, was accepted to go to India.
And this is your first year after graduating?
And I declined going. And in that summer of 67, I worked in Seminole, Oklahoma. Met Emma D. shortly after that. And in the summer of 68, she took a summer job with the Jones Company in Dallas, Texas, a department store company. I had plastic surgery on my left arm in Oklahoma City to get full extension of it. And during the recovery, went down to Dallas with the intent to see her for 3 days and come back to Oklahoma. I ended up staying the entire summer. And I got a job with Ready Ice. And it was swamping a truck, working in this ice plant. And it literally was throwing ice and another man catching it and putting it into storage boxes in front of and in convenience stores. And it's one of those vanities. Late that summer, I did set an ice throwing record. I threw 4,498 10-pound bags one day, and a man half my size caught them, which I found amazing. We finally got a day off, and Emma D. and I drove down to Austin just to see the Texas State Capitol and what it was like. And you have a moment in a relationship quite often that's definitive. And we stood in front of the campus, in front of the Capitol building in Austin, and I turned to her and I said, "Do you want to drive to Mexico and get married?" And she looked at me and said, "I want to get married, but my mother would have a fit." And so that was the summer of '68. We came back, and the ice company had wanted me to stay on. I wanted to finish education. We came back, worked through it. We ultimately get married in the summer of '69, in August of '69. The ice company, I write them asking for a full-time job, and I get a letter back from 7-Eleven, their parent company. And I ultimately interview with the president of 7-Eleven, and I'm hired on a special program of theirs. And that's how a philosopher and psychologist ends up getting into business.
With a lot of engineering background.
Yes, ma'am.
That's great. Well, what have been a couple of highlight moments of your very diverse business career?
I spent 17 years in convenience stores and was fortunate to rise quickly, working for a subsidiary of what is now Kroger, a Dillon subsidiary, and going on to be vice president of real estate and construction at Stop and Go Foods owned by Sun Will. That exposure took me off into Pennsylvania to Philadelphia to their world headquarters. And I made a choice when I was 39, seeing what was happening in the industry, that I didn't want to be at the major changes, and that industry did go through those changes, but it was gut-wrenching, and some very good companies came out of it and succeeded. A friend of mine at that time was Chet Cadio, who labeled me the bearded bard of Western Kansas. And of course, he was building Quick Trip. Yes. And did an excellent job. Yes. And we shared many podiums at that time. I can't say enough good things about him. He was progressive. He was a man who double-staffed stores when other people single-staffed them. That's a security and safety issue. He was open and progressive in the products he bought. He was committed to large gasoline installations. He just did a lot of very smart things for the industry and for that. After making the change out of the convenience store industry, I was interviewed by a headhunter, one of the major ones. I want to say it was Hedrick and Struggles, but I asked him at one moment, I said, "My degrees are in philosophy and psych. What should I say?" And his comeback was very quick: "Say you learn to think." And that, I think, is the best comment I can give any arts and science major. It teaches you to think if you've done some study and actually paid attention in class. I went on to work for Hardee's and for Popeyes and Church's, which was called America's Favorite Chicken, and to be vice president of national accounts at TCBY. They were all very good years. Often I would keep a condo or an apartment in Atlanta or Little Rock at corporate headquarters, while M&D maintained a house in St. Charles, Missouri, so we had a commuting marriage here. One decisive moment is at AFC, America's Favorite Chicken Company, and that was before, well, I should back up a moment. Al Copeland of Popeyes fame had bought Church's. He had overpaid by $100 million. It went into bankruptcy, and I was part of the team that was brought in to lead them out of bankruptcy. It was also the moment of the O.J. Simpson trials. Mm-hmm. So here we are in what's called Perimeter on the north side of Atlanta, 3 very tall sky rises out there. And we have 3 floors, in this nice modern building. One floor is Popeyes, one is churches, and the next one is us corporate people. We go to lunch. Imagine these middle-aged white males all going out to lunch together. More than half our staff, because it is Popeyes and churches, are black. And the black community has an immense loyalty to churches in particular. So the announcement of his acquittal comes over at about lunchtime, Eastern time. We return to our office, all us white males questioning the legal aspects of this trial. Our staff is in joyous celebration. A party has seriously begun. And if nothing else, that again is one of those decisive, clear moments when you understand that there was truly another point of view, one that had been sublimated, that had almost been kept out of sight. But they were very happy people with that verdict. So that is a moment. I ended up in those years, especially in the sales years, development years, doing 22 trade shows a year, which led me to have the hard life of spending 5-6 weeks a year in Las Vegas and 2 or 3 at Orlando around Disney, and sometimes in Nashville 2 or 3. It is a caravan of gypsies, but what it also exposes you to is to the citizens of the United States, to business people, and the number of people that want to start a business. And I'm actually proud of that the franchise system that I was a part of encouraged the foundation. It goes all the way from the McDonald's franchisees to dealerships and people that are selling feed. There's all kinds of franchises as a business model to get them into business. Proud of moments, yes. I look back and say, okay, we created over 10,000 jobs. Some of those are starter jobs, flipping hamburgers. Some of those are serious jobs of business ownership with significant income levels. I am proud of participating in that, and I philosophically can look at it and say, yes, I think I've had a meaningful life. Another piece that arose during the Popeyes and churches days especially is I'm proud of participating in Habitat for Humanity. I believe in that. I've participated in building over 20 homes, some in East St. Louis, some in Atlanta, some in Little Rock. Every one of those, the homeowner, the people are own, they are participating, working. This is one of those great things that any American can participate and do, and something useful helps. The other personal charity that I participated in as a young man that I fully endorse is Big Brothers and Big Sisters. And I've had 3 little brothers in there, one of which I've kept in contact with. And once again, this is a thing I think most Americans, with or without money, can participate and do and be. It contributes to our society, it has a meaningful effect, and I believe in that.
Mm-hmm. Those are wonderful things to be involved with. Well, as you know, a lot of books have been written about the impact of the boomer generation on society, and some are positive and some are negative. What do you think about their contributions overall?
I find the Vietnam War a difficult subject on many levels. My daughters are 40 and 44, and I think it was probably the oldest one that came home and said they were studying the Vietnam War in high school. And this goes on to today. The Ken's Burns shows have been very good because they exposed something. Many Oklahomans get aggravated, but it exposed what was really happening at those moments. So my daughter comes home talking about this history class and how they're talking about the war and the people were heroes. And I'm having to choose my words very carefully when I'm talking to her, and I'm saying, look, honey, on a personal level, an individual can be uninformed and have come out of an environment that says support your country. This is what you do. This is your choice. Your country drafts you, needs you, and says, come be part. At that moment, that person is doing what they're supposed to do, maybe with conscious thought, maybe without. If it's conscious thought, and they believe that going to a foreign country and basically stopping a war for freedom, for liberation, that's what North Vietnamese were fighting for, was a civil war, wanting their own freedom to get the French out and then to get the Americans out. If you have a view that says, I understand all the issues and I still want to defend my country, I disagree with that view, but I can respect it. If you were uninformed and you went simply because your family said this is the right thing to do, I feel, I guess, I feel that you should not be praised. I would like to see everybody, it's the philosopher coming out saying, the unexamined life is not worth living. I do want to see people examine life and make intelligent choices. If you came to a full understanding of the war and you were anti-war and still went, that's philosophically a very difficult case to wrestle with. My position had, because of the burns, I suspected I would not be drafted. I was drafted. I was told to show up for a physical on August 25th in Kansas City, Kansas for induction, which was the day after I was getting married in Southern Illinois. I got the physical postponed. I showed up. I had the pin in my elbow, I had the burns, I had the scars and so forth. And of course they looked at it and said, we don't want you. That puts me in a difficult position, a different position than many of my cohorts at the time. I was a person who did not really have to worry about being drafted. So my views could be independent. They did not have to be too self-centered. You know, I didn't have to be anti-war because I was afraid physically. And I didn't have to be pro-war either. I could try to look at this and say, what do I believe is right? We ultimately lost the Vietnam War. It is one of those things that to live peacefully in Oklahoma, I try not to make a big issue of that. I am not proud of the American role in Southeast Asia. And I think history and the Burns pieces will continue to show that. It is complex, it is difficult, and it did shape our entire generation.
Well, when you come back to campus now and see the changes, what are some of your thoughts?
First of all, in walking to the front of the library today, I'm looking at that and I'm remembering events that we had on the greens out there and where we gathered lots of people and advocated for free thought and free speech. And some of those questions remained very difficult. And I looked at the trees and I said, you know, these trees are bigger. It is more shaded. You're starting to get more of a feel of the campus that you would if you were east of the Mississippi, the older places, whether you're at Purdue or Indiana University or Miami of Ohio, so forth. So I like the feel of the campus. I deeply respect what the maintenance and the administration has done maintaining that. I also sit in barber shops once in a while, and I listen to people criticize the youth of today, how it's changing, how they're not going to amount to anything, so forth. And at that moment, my philosophical readings are useful. I tell them, look, I can take you to Greek writings from over 2,000 years ago, where they were criticizing the youth of their day. Some things don't change. I like Oklahoma State's vitality. I like the fact that the vast majority of these students come here for an education. Their head is in the right place. I'm hoping their heart is too. That's something only the future will tell. I like the campus itself maintaining some fundamental core that whether you graduated in 1960, 1980, 2000, or next year, it's very similar. There's some experiences here that don't change. I also suspect that even though the technology advanced greatly, that the fundamental part of students coming here when they're 18, 19, or 20 and undergoing an educational experience, living on campus, off campus, participating, I think that moment continues to get better. What would I like? I would like to see the state of Oklahoma fund this. I would like to see it be less dependent upon the finances of families. I would like to see education be open and even broader. And so in that small segment, I'm concerned the trends aren't moving that way in Oklahoma at this time. I sincerely hope those trends get reversed.
Anything else that you'd like to add or share?
No, not that I can think of off the top of my head.
Well,
what question should I ask at that moment?
I think that's a very eloquent thought to close on. I was going to ask about what you felt you carried from your OSU experience into your life. I think we've heard a lot of good examples of that. But
yep. For me personally, on a very personal level, and hopefully it's obvious in these interviews, what OSU did was give me an opportunity. And one person once told me, he says, "Jerry, I can get you a job." He says, "But it's up to you to keep it." And an education is the same way. You can have an environment or a location or a place. And OSU is one of those places, one of those settings, that an education is possible. But it is entirely up to the student to reach out, grab it, embrace that education. What it specifically did for me was, by choosing to participate in absolutely everything that I saw announced in the OOHRP or conversations I heard about, whether it was working in the athletic cafeteria, or carrying old punch cards around this campus, or participating with Dr. Rambo in the psychology department in survey creation, the jobs were a part of it. The student discussions in Bennett, Parker, and later Hanner were another part of it. The conversations with professors were a third part of it, and visits to the student union and those discussion rooms were a fourth great part of it. That, coupled with the ultimate living off campus as a GDI, was an exposure. And it is a menu of life, and what you choose to eat off that plate is entirely dependent upon the student. So if I have a message to students, it is reach out, grab it, go for it. You are personally responsible for the education you get.
well, thank you very much for your time today, Jerry.
Thank you.